Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 41. Well, it's been quite the year. The Real Python team has written, edited, curated, illustrated, and produced a mountain of Python articles this year. We also upgraded the site and membership with office hours, transcripts, this podcast, and much more. We are joined by two members of the Real Python team this week, David Amos and Joanna Jablonski. We wanted to share a year-end wrap-up with a collection of articles that showcase the diversity of Python topics and the quality of what our team created this year. Joanna and David helped to shepherd articles through the multi-stage editing process. They make sure articles not only impart crucial Python knowledge, but also provide a thorough didactic experience. We hope you enjoy this review, and as a programming note, there won't be an episode next week, but we will be back the following week, and we look forward to bringing you a year full of great guests, topics, projects, and articles. All right, let's get started. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week, we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hey, David, welcome back.
Hey, Chris. Good to be here.
So we have a special guest this week, another member of the Real Python team, Joanna Jablonski, is helping us out with this episode.
Hi, guys.
Hey, welcome.
Thank you.
So we're considering this sort of a year-end wrap-up for the Real Python podcast. We're not going to have an episode next week, so this will be kind of our end of the year sort of spectacular. And Joanna's really a great person to bring on board, along with David. Both of you guys are super involved in helping carry all those articles to the site that everybody enjoys every week. I want to talk a little bit about, we've mentioned, Joanna, that you're involved in that process way back in episode 1 with Gararna. And then I think I talked to David about it a little bit and talked about the kinds of roles that you have. But do you want to just go over your background a little bit with Real Python and what you're currently doing?
For sure. I came on board early 2018. I guess the broadest way to describe what I do is I just run written content at Real Python. We take our articles through a pretty extensive review process, and we're really proud of how that's going.
Yeah,
I'm really happy with the content that it's been putting together and just the community that's grown up around it. It seems like a really positive place to learn, which is useful for me too, because I don't really have a traditional CS background. And so when I started, it was basically a way for me to just read and write tutorials all day. So I basically just get to be paid to learn to a large extent. And that's been really cool.
Yeah, I think people could probably tell that's sort of my background with Real Python too. I was super excited to come on board and use these resources as a way to learn. And then, by teaching the the tutorials and now the podcast has been really fantastic to kind of even broaden that even a little bit more, get to ask lots of basic questions of people, and hopefully people have those same questions that they want answered. Partly what we're going to do here is go over a collection of articles that we feel like really highlight not only what Real Python provides as this resource, but also kind of like standout stuff from the year. And a lot of these we've talked about on the podcast, so we'll mention the episode that they came on. We're not going to do super deep dives on them, but we want to just kind of talk about like key takeaways, like things that we thought were really great about these articles, why you may be interested in them if you're interested in a particular learning path, and just to provide you, a good sort of resource like, hey, if you missed this, you should check these out this year if you want to take some time over the end of the holidays here to enjoy them. And so, David, do you want to start off with your first one?
Sure. First one I've got comes from Brian Weber, who's been featured, I think, several times now on the podcast.
Yeah.
It's the Pandas project, Make a Gradebook with Python and Pandas. This was a really fun article that we put together with Brian that takes you through actually putting together a project, something that you can actually work through completion, and then you have a full project. So it was a little bit different in that sense that it's not so much focused on teaching you the concepts of pandas and how to work with it, as opposed to applying those concepts to a real world application. So Brian is a university teacher, or professor, I guess is the correct term there. Obviously, one of the things that he has to do in his job is deal with grades a whole lot. So he has shared in this tutorial one of the tools that he actually uses in his work, which is a Pandas gradebook that he uses to calculate all the statistics and keep track of everyone's grades and be able to just, understand how his classes are doing and take a lot of the work out at the end of each grading period that all teachers have to do. That's usually just manual labor. So he's automated a lot of that with Pandas. So it's a really great overview of how to apply Pandas to a real world project. It does assume that you know something about Pandas, and it's got links to prerequisites that you should look at before you dive into it. But otherwise, it just takes you step by step into the process. And so it's kind of a unique article on Real Python in that sense. We don't have at this point any other examples of this kind of step-by-step project. It's really fun. I think it really shows you the power of Python in sort of a non-traditional like CS space, right? Like it's just, you're a teacher. Most teachers probably don't ever think about using something like Python to make their lives a little bit easier. So This is a really, really great example of how Python gives you like superpowers, as Michael Kennedy likes to say.
Right. Automating the boring stuff,
Right. Yeah.
to go back to another former guest.
Yeah.
Yes. This is part of this Pandas in data science, some of these learning paths that we're creating on Real Python, right? That's what you're saying, that the prerequisites kind of line up with this sort of culminating, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The prerequisites that you need can be found in other Real Python articles. So you can take everything that you've learned in those and then apply it to this project.
Nice. That was featured back on episode 21. If you want to get a little deeper dive into some of that, where we spoke about it before, and excited about what Brian is going to bring us in the future here.
Yeah, same. I always like seeing new stuff coming from Brian. He's a good author.
My first one is one that we featured back on episode 13, which was the first time David was on the show, which is both of us were like, wow, okay. That seems like a very long time ago as far as all the things that we've been doing.
That was actually pre-COVID, wasn't it?
Nope. Actually, it's just June. So it was like before it got as crushing as it is now. Yeah. It's so, this year is
feels
so
like
wild.
It was decades ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was by Jason van Schooneveld, and it's build physical projects with Python on the Raspberry Pi. I got really excited about this one, and I really wanted to talk about it because I have two of them, and people have heard me talk about Raspberry Pi on multiple other episodes. And what I like about it is it really went from beginning to end. The beginning of, hey, you have this new device, you need to set it up, and getting it set up for Python is actually quite a few steps. And I really like that about it. It said, okay, here's how to run it on it. Here's using the mu editor or mu editor. And then I already mentioned on that episode where I was talking about, I set it up for VS Code and was doing remote stuff over SSH, which is really neat. So the idea that you don't necessarily have to have it set as a computer, though it is kind of a fully functional Linux computer, which is very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Then it dives into, really what the meat of the Python part is, which is interacting with the physical sensors and getting it connected to electronics and kind of diving a little deeper into that. And that's something we've definitely focused on a few other episodes. And so sending output to external components, hooking up to the general purpose IO little jumpers that are on there. And it culminates in first, setting up LEDs and a buzzer and other kinds of simple stuff. And then the end point is to get a motion activated little alarm system.
Yeah.
Which is really fun. So I think it's a good way if you want to start with hardware and Python, it's a good place to start. The advantage of using, say, a Raspberry Pi over some other things is it's a computer. So there's other things you can do with it and explore types of Python, especially if you're doing that with kids. You can not only do the project sides of it, but you also can explore just purely the coding part of it too, which is really cool.
Yeah. I just want to add that, I did the technical review for this article, and it was so much fun. It was the only, so to add some context to this, I've got a box in a drawer that's got a Raspberry Pi and a bunch of like just random things in it, and that I bought with the best of intentions to really dig deep into all that stuff.
Sure.
And it's, I've played with it here and there, but it's mainly just been, sitting in my drawer. And it was really cool and totally unique. I'd never done this for another article where I actually was able to get it out, and I didn't have all the components, but I had, I think, like 75% or 80% of what you needed for the little projects in it. And I was able to actually build the projects while I was reviewing the article, and it was just a really fun experience. So that was, I have very fond memories of doing that. It was fun.
Yeah. Have you played with the Raspberry Pi at all, Joanna?
No, I haven't, but it's one of the topics that shows up in articles that does pique my interest. I haven't taken the plunge and actually, gotten the bits and bobs to do it, but there are just so many topics I kind of get a bit of a deer in the headlights sometimes, since there's so many different areas that you can take this in. I'm very good at starting ideas and starting projects, but when it comes to actually finishing them, sometimes I might find something else that's a little bit shiny.
Yeah, no, I have that slightly ADHD project mentality sometimes myself. Yeah. And so, yeah, I enjoyed this one a lot, and I look forward to, Jason put out one we just talked about recently, the Modulo one we talked about in a recent episode. So excited to see what else Jason brings out in the next coming year. So Joanna, what do you got for your first thing you want to showcase?
Yes. Okay, so this one's by Jim Anderson, and it was a new format that we tried, and it seemed like the community was pretty into it when I saw just the conversation that was happening on the office hours session about it. Jim came in and talked about it, and it seems like people really found that format helpful because it's interactive. I'll get to that in a minute. Basically, it's called Python Practice Problems, Get Ready for Your Next Interview, and it's for intermediate Pythonistas who are getting ready for interviews. So you're going to go through a series of progressively harder problems, and these are problems that the Real Python team has actually used in interviews in real life. So it is based in reality and is pretty practical that way.
Yeah.
But even if you just like doing problems, I think that's fun to do too. Because again, with my appreciation for shiny things, often personally, I like doing problems more than I like actually doing projects, because you don't really have to get tied up in basically getting through some of the maybe less rewarding tasks to do in your free time. So it can be nice to just like pour a glass of wine and do some problems or something like that. But in this tutorial, you're gonna see how to write code for interview style problems and how to discuss your solutions during the interview, which is a super important part because it's not enough to just have answers that work. You need to show that you can work as part of a team and all that. And you can point out some frequently overlooked details that you don't want to catch in that kind of situation. And generally just see how to talk about design decisions and trade-offs, and just make the most of the interview and make a good impression on your interviewer.
Yeah.
So as I was saying, what's special about this one is that it's an interactive article. So instead of just having the solution explained at you, you can go to the repo and get the skeleton code and unit tests and try to find your own solutions before looking at the answers that the Real Python team came up with. And that can help you consider multiple different kinds of solutions and what the pros and cons of different ones could be. And I was saying it also covers some of the non-coding elements of interviews. So for example, if you get stuck on a problem, it doesn't have to be the end of the world. You can talk through your thought process and show the interviewer that you can communicate, which is ultimately a super important part of working as part of a team. This interactive tutorial is actually part of an entire learning path on preparing for interviews. So you can check that out. It's called Ace Your Python Coding Interview. And we're also going to be putting out more interactive learning resources like this.
Yeah, it was great. We had Jim come on. I know he came on the office hours. So there's that for members that want to check it out. They can see that episode and him talking about the code in more detail. And then we featured him on episode 27, where he came in on as a guest to talk about the article. And he told us about how he was like I asked him, like, have you used these same kind of questions or seen these types of questions in his own interviews? And he mentioned his experience with it. And it's really fun. Jim's a good guy. Fellow Coloradan. Yeah, I'm excited to see what Jim brings out in the next year here. All right, so that brings us back to David. What's your next one?
The next one on my list is Data Version Control with Python and DVC by Christian Ivanchik. Before I get into the article, I just want to say, Christian has written a couple other tutorials for us, and he went on a little bit of a hiatus and then came back with this one. And I was thrilled to see another article come from Christian because he's I think a really fantastic writer and presents things just very clearly and has a lot of, it's easy to follow along with, he's just a natural teacher, I think. So I was really thrilled to see that. And it's also a really fascinating article. I was not familiar with this DVC project, which literally stands for Data Version Control. It's a Python project. It's all written in Python. And you can kind of think of it as like Git for data. So it's a workflow and a tool for actually versioning data and models and everything involved with machine learning. And it really solves a really kind of large problem in that space. And so it was just really incredible to see that project and the work that they'd put into it. And it's still very new. It literally hit like version 1.0 as Christian was writing the article. So I think he had to step back and kind of fix a few things that, they'd maybe changed or finalized a few things about like the API and things like that. So, but yeah, it was just a really, really cool project that he was talking about. And he walks you through the whole process and shows you how to get it installed, how to use this. He compares it to Git. So if you're familiar with Git, you can kind of see, because there's a lot of similarities in the commands. There's like a DVC commit and a DVC push and pull. And, there's a lot of very similar ideas, but there are a few differences as well. So he's got some really great visual aids in there that really help to sort of clarify how things are in some ways the same and how they are actually, somewhat different from each other. Some really cool visualizations. So yeah, overall, if you're in the data space, I think this is just a really cool tool to have in your toolkit and to be aware of. And this is a fantastic article to get started with that. It does kind of walk you through an example where you build a model and you have like some data sets and everything, but it's very, I was going to say simple, but it's I guess the focus is not on the code itself so much as it is just learning how to use this tool.
Right.
So he's kept it very approachable with all of that. And, it's not getting into like crazy machine learning or anything like that. So yeah, highly recommended if you're into the data space. It was just, I just was like, this is amazing. I can't believe I've never heard of this tool. And then it's like, oh, of course I haven't heard of it. It literally just came out. So yeah. It's like, man, I wish I had this when I was working as a data scientist. So good stuff.
So the way that he structures the code examples that are included there, it looks like you could use it with other types of machine learning and other types of resources. You're saying that it should be fairly plug and play the way it's laid out?
Yeah, exactly. It's a pretty generic project that he goes through, and he talks about, I think you see as you read it that there's nothing like specific to this example that he's using. He needed something, right, to sort of, give you a real, something you could actually get your hands dirty with and start, playing around with. All the code for the example is available for download. You click a link in the article and you can get all that, so you can follow along and you don't have to type out any of that code yourself. And you can just focus on learning about these commands and how to use the DVC tool.
Nice. All right. Brings it to me. So this one is kind of a fun one. This is by Brad Solomon, who I think we've featured a couple times now, but this is one called What Are Python Wheels and Why Should You Care? You might remember us featuring it in episode 23, and it led to a whole launch into the world of not only wheels, but also ways to share your code and how to package them. And I brought Idemar on in the following episode 24.
Right.
And
yeah.
He helped us talk a lot about that stuff, which was really, really great. He shared a lot of his experience with packaging things up and sharing it. And then shortly after that, I had a couple people from the PIP team to talk to us a lot about resolving package dependencies. And that was in episode 29, which was really fun to talk to them about what they're doing with the project and, all the, all the ways that, things that are happening behind the scenes. You don't really realize all these people that work on all these tools that you may use every day and not realize that there's a whole infrastructure there. I had not known the word wheel at the time. It's one of these things that, again, I was just using pip install and going through it and not really noticing some of the stuff behind the scenes. And this article really goes into like, okay, what are wheels and how they compare to other types of distributions, source distributions, this sdist thing you might have seen before, how you can use wheels to control the package installation process. Very often we went into a whole thing in our previous episode where we were talking about how wheels it can be very simple wheels, which are just purely Python, and it doesn't matter the platform they're on. And then when they have underlying code, things like C or other stuff like that, they need to be compiled, and they need to be then for specific Linux distributions, or, with this new computer platform came out this year with the M1 Apple stuff, which that might be interesting too. So all that kind of relates into that. And so it kind of wraps talking about, okay, well, this is what's happening. How would you create and distribute wheels of your own for your own Python packages? And I don't think it's a subject that's really covered that often, or it's kind of one of these things you really have to dig pretty deep to learn some of these resources.
Yeah.
So I really like that about it. And it led me into my own sort of journey of deep dive into packaging, which you can kind of follow along in previous episodes of the show. It really helped me see some of the complexity of what's happening and appreciate all the work that's happening.
Yeah, it's one of those topics that if you're not like a package author or maintainer, you're probably never going to brush up against this. And yet it's so incredibly important, because for those of us that consume those packages, if those wheels aren't available or there's something wrong with them, then, it can, we might just not use that package. And so if you want people to use it, it's something, it's definitely, a more advanced topic. But yeah, I agree. There's not a lot of, I guess, friendly content out there for it. You end up, I think, having to do a lot of digging into docs and just, maybe trying to find people that just have experience with that. And so it was good to see that being documented on Real Python.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Made me really appreciate, like I said, multiple times now, just like everything that's going on. And one of the things I think we mentioned before, I'm trying to remember who we talked about with, but just the idea of trying to get people to understand, hey, like if you're going to share your code, all the things that you need to go into, not only if you're going to put it inside of the Python, PyPI, or you're going to, do some other things with that, you should understand, how those things need to be created properly. And, or if you're just sharing code within an organization and having to save the resources locally to have your own repository. So,
yeah.
This week, I want to shine a spotlight on another Real Python video course. It's titled Python Turtle for Beginners. The course is based on a Real Python article by Nikita Silaperesedi. The course is designed for students and Python beginners. In the course, instructor Darren Jones helps you understand what the Python Turtle library is. You learn how to set Turtle up on your computer, program with the Python Turtle library, grasp some important Python concepts and Turtle commands, and by the end, develop a short but entertaining game using what you've learned. If you're a beginner to Python, then this course will definitely help you on your journey as you take your first steps into the world of programming. And like most of the video courses on Real Python, the course is broken into easily consumable sections and has code samples for the techniques shown. It also includes a shiny new transcript and closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the enhanced search tool on realpython.com. All right, so what do you got, Joanna? What's your next one?
All right, next up is called Python Import, Advanced Techniques and Tips. And as the name suggests, it's a little bit more advanced than you might expect for something that's on imports.
Yeah.
Which does kind of make sense because the author is Garner, who is an exceptionally thorough author,
yes.
So he really brings it here. Even though importing is a topic that you may cover pretty early in your Python education, this article is a bit more advanced. You are going to cover like how to use modules and packages and namespace packages and how to handle resources and data files inside your packages and how to import modules dynamically at runtime and how to customize Python's import system. So you're going to cover the basics to start with, but then it goes on a proper deep dive into really like what's really going on under all that. And you can see how things can go wrong with collisions, like if you write your own module that conflicts with something that's built in, and you can see how to use imports generally to just improve the structure of your code and make it easier to maintain. And the tutorial is really example driven too. So it's, again, quite practical. You can get the source code for the examples and then follow along with them as you go. And if you want to really get more into imports and learn more about that, but you're a bit more of a beginner maybe, you can check out another tutorial that we have on imports called absolute versus relative imports in Python. So you can check that out. It's not like full beginner. You're still going to have some of the background on imports, but maybe you can get that from the beginning of the Python import advanced techniques and tips tutorial, and then kind of expand your knowledge to learn more about the whole absolute versus relative thing with the other tutorial.
Yeah, I like how this one really goes into like namespaces and all that kind of stuff that you kind of maybe don't know is happening behind the scenes, and being aware of all these kind of like little crucial stuff. And like you said, Garon is super thorough and wants to cover like almost all the corners that he can.
Yeah.
In an article, which is really great. And he's been a great guest multiple times on the show. He came in for our Python 3.9 discussion with Christopher Trudeau and had written that article.
Yeah.
And then he was our first guest, which was really great. Just kind of hear some of his background, and it got me started creating courses with the decorators course. So, all right, David, what do you got?
Next one I've got is called Hands-on Linear Programming Optimization with Python by Mirko. And I apologize, Mirko. Next time Mirko and I have a phone call, I need to have him, or maybe I need to have him record how to pronounce his last name. I'm not going to attempt it because I know I'm going to just botch it. But Mirko is a professor of engineering, I believe. And so he has lots of experience with using Python in that space, in kind of the scientific computing and engineering applications and everything. And one of the things you do a lot of as an engineer is optimization. And it's a very, I think, kind of a niche topic, but I wanted to highlight it because I think it's really, it's something that not everyone gets exposed to if you don't have a lot of math in your background, but it's such a powerful technique. If you're working in business or industry, it can really solve some problems that you're, trying to figure out, like cost analysis or things like this, or how to optimize production and things like that. And so it's one of those things I feel like more people kind of need to be aware of this and know that you can do this, and also see that it's relatively easy to do with Python. There's a lot of things that have already been taken care of for you. And once you sort of understand how it works, then you can apply that using some of these packages. So Mirko talks about what linear programming is. And I think he talks a little bit about, how it works and some of the mathematical background there, which may be of interest or may not, but there is some math involved in that. But he dives into some actual examples and shows you kind of the power of this technique and how you can actually use it, and discusses sort of the two different implementations that there are in Python, one using the SciPy package and one using the package that I've actually used myself, which is Pulp, or PULP. So he kind of talks kind of the differences between those two packages. They kind of come from a different standpoint. One is a little bit more like in the functional programming sort of side of things, and one is more in the object-oriented side of things. So it's two different approaches to the same problem, but you get to see how you would solve one of these optimization problems using both of those packages. So definitely, I highly recommend it. There's not many resources like this out there. I think it's unique to real Python in a lot of ways, especially with how thorough it is and how approachable it is to read the article and get started with it. So Mirko did a fantastic job. I think regular listeners know that I come from a math background, so topics like this are kind of near and dear to my heart. But I was really excited to see that Mirko grabbed this. In fact, I think at one point I was hoping that I would be able to get this topic, but Mirko beat me to it, but he did an awesome job with it. Yeah. So just really pleased to see that out on the site.
Yeah, cool. Next one that I have is from previous guest Christopher Trudeau, who, if you're a member of if you have a Real Python membership, and you probably have noticed he's done a lot of work over this last year in video courses, put out a bunch of really great ones, not only the Python 3.9 one with all of its features, but he also has had a kind of a focus on Django stuff. He's got a few other Django stuff kind of coming out in the pipeline soon, which I hope people will be excited about. And continuing on that theme, he wrote an article called Customize the Django Admin with Python. If you've messed around with Django a little bit, you probably have heard us talk about differences between Flask and Django and kind of the bit of batteries included thing that Django has. And one of the great things that it features is this admin interface where you can kind of create data and do basic interfacing. And it's such a great kind of tool that comes with it. You just kind of start out with this idea of building on the model objects that are inside of Django and then adding those attributes into the admin interface and then linking everything together, adding filters, creating search fields for those kinds of things, modifying edit forms, and then going all the way up to editing the administrative templates and the template system that's part of Django. And this one is more advanced. It's kind of built on this whole set of Django tutorials that we have, if you will, sort of our learning path for that sort of stuff. And one of the more popular ones that's out there that we have is we have a whole Django Part 1 Build a Portfolio app, which is a really popular, great article that we have on the site. And then also a previous guest, Martin Broyce, was on, and he talked to us about learning through errors. And he has his version of this, which is a video course, which is super popular. And I always see a lot of activity going on with that. And then some other prerequisites of setting up a virtual environment. And then there's a couple other ones I'm trying to remember that also are in there of working with Django. But lots of resources. I'll definitely include some of the additional links to that stuff in that. And I learned a lot recently because I had to review this because it's being turned into a course, and it should be coming out just after this episode. So if you're grabbing this episode over the weekend, it's going to come in between these next couple weeks as a video course, and it's by Darren Jones. And I learned a ton following through it. I've been playing with Django for a long time, and I've dabbled in the admin interface, but I hadn't really, gone and deeply customized things. And I just found it really great and really built on my intermediate knowledge and helped me kind of level some of that up. And I learned about something that I guess I should know by now, but again, I had never used it up to this point, this idea of fixtures, which is really great of loading data in. We've talked about ORMs. David and I talked about that last week, this idea of being able to migrate things and save those migrations. So if you have to rebuild a database, here's a way that you could actually have data ready to go and not have to manually create all the data and load it in. Like some of the tutorials I've seen, they spend so much time with you actually in the terminal typing in individual values into a database, which is just so frustrating. And this thing is great to be able to have some data as JSON and be able to load it in as a fixture, which is really cool. So I'm excited by that. And Christopher's been a great help throughout this whole year in the video course pipeline. So I'm excited to share this with you guys. I think it's a good resource for you.
Yeah, he's also one of the few. Martin has also done this, but he's one of the few video course instructors that has kind of
crossed over,
managed to cross over into the written part of it as well. So, yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So, what do you got next, Joanna?
All right, next up is the Python return statement usage and best practices. That one's by Leodanis, who has also been quite prolific, especially with his whole PyQt learning path that he's working through, which also seems to be really useful for people.
Yeah.
Just to have a very clearly laid out system for really getting up to speed on how to do GUI stuff with PyQt. And yeah, that's been quite cool, but not what I'm talking about right now. This article, it's about the return statement. It's a good one for beginners, but it still does manage to be pretty thorough. you are going to see how to use the Python return statement in your functions and how to return single or multiple values from your functions, and go into what the best practices are for using return statements. But broadly, what's special about this tutorial is that it can help you fill in the gaps in your knowledge if you're self-taught. And it's just like another tutorial that covers a seemingly simple topic, but goes into a lot of depth on it, which is a bit of a reoccurring theme with our tutorials. We have a lot of deep dives into apparently simple topics. For example, we've got this one tutorial about the print function that I keep bringing up that really gets into it, gets to the point where you're building a snake game with print. Like, I feel like if I were to just start Googling like Python print, I would not be expecting that extensive of a dive into it, that deep of a dive. But it was just a really interesting read. It definitely over-delivered what I was expecting on that topic, like what I would expect from it as a reader. And we got plenty more deep dives like that, if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah,
definitely.
We're going to twist his arm and get him on the show.
Yes, definitely. Talking about PyQt, definitely.
I know, I need to, because he's, I don't know. It's at least 4 that have come out so far, I think. So,
oh, there's more planned. It's a pretty sweet learning path that we're planning for this.
Great. Okay, cool. So what you got next, David?
Yeah, that actually talking about PyQt is actually a good segue into the next topic that I have, which is Python GUI programming with Tkinter. And let me see who wrote this.
Nice.
oh, it's me. Yeah, this is so. Before I get into it here, I just want to say that I pulled this up in my browser before we started recording, and I saw the date was January 22nd, 2020.
Yeah.
This was published, and I was like, "Oh my god!"
How long ago does that feel like?
Like, that's crazy. I was just a young, naive guy back then, you know?
Right.
But this is actually a chapter from the Python Basics book, which we've talked about. And this is another, almost a book in itself. I'm not going to lie. It's a long introduction to GUI programming, because I feel like it would take volumes of books to do the whole topic of GUI programming true justice. But this one was a lot of fun to write, because I personally didn't have a lot of experience with making GUIs in Python. So I have worked with GUIs before. And in fact, at a previous job I had years ago, one of my primary tasks was making user interfaces for people, but it was not using Python. So it was a lot of fun to dive into that part of the Python world, which I had never really explored. And one of the interesting things that I found was that, this Tkinter thing comes with Python. It's built in, and there's a little bit of information if you read through the Python docs, but there's not a lot. And it just sort of felt like, how do you even get started with this? And in the course of doing research, I found there's some books out there that have been written and give you some introductions to this. And there's some other resources I found on the web, but some of them were incomplete, or maybe felt like they had sort of started off strong, but then kind of petered out eventually. Or, one of the issues with Tkinter is that it's not written in Python. It's written in a language called Tcl, or TCL. And what Tkinter is in the library is just a wrapper around that. And so when you search for a lot of examples, you might come across examples that are written in like Ruby, or written in even Perl or things like that, or in Tcl, the original language. And what I found was that if you really wanted to know how it works, you had to go to the Tcl documentation and just read it there, and then sort of work through the layers to translate it back into Python. And it was kind of an arduous experience. And so what I felt that I brought to this topic was sort of a more complete and, I guess, introduction to that, sort of bringing all that research and knowledge into one spot and making it very Python centric. So it's just focusing on how to do it in Python with a lot of research to back all that up. So it was a lot of fun to write. There's a lot of information packed into it. You learn, it goes through the basics and you learn how to create some little widgets and things like that. It culminates in creating a couple of projects, and one that I thought was really cool to sort of show the power of Tkinter is just in a few lines of code. I think it's less than 50 if I remember correctly. It might be a little bit more, but definitely less than like 75. You build a little text editor. I mean, not the world's foremost text editor application, obviously, but just a little simple text editor where you can open up files and edit them and save them and things like that. And throughout the article, there are little exercises sprinkled in, and those are taken straight from the Python Basics book. If you read the book, you get to the end of a section in the chapter, and there's a few exercises that you can do. So I took a few of those exercises, sort of curated the ones that I wanted to put into the web version, and put those in as these interactive exercise components. And that was a real hit with readers. If you scroll through the comments on the article, there's a lot of people saying, how much they really liked seeing those exercises in there. It's something we've had on the website for a long time, and it doesn't get used a whole lot. Although I do try to sort of nudge authors sometimes where I think it would be really beneficial to, add these exercises in.
Right.
And then of course we also have the quizzes, which is sort of taking that to the next level. But I think there's still a valid use case for these exercises just being sprinkled into the article itself. But anyways, if you're interested in Tkinter, then maybe I have a biased opinion here, but I do think it's a really solid resource. I put a lot of heart and soul into it, so hopefully people enjoy it.
Yeah.
It is a great article, like 100%.
Yeah.
Just so we have someone other than you saying it.
And you're not biased at all.
Well, I mean...
Well, Tkinter is something that's included. Like, it's not something you have to import in. Well, I mean, you have to import it, but you don't have to pip install it. It's
install anything.
Yeah. Which is kind of interesting. And that's true of almost all the GUI packages, the idea that they are sort of cross-platform projects in order for them to really be able to work across the platforms. The idea of working on Windows and Linux and all these different, operating systems kind of goes back to my conversation with Russell about Beware and the language that they are creating, and then having to translate their GUI tool that would then also have to have like all these widgets and things that work in mobile also, which is
right.
It's kind of interesting. So yeah. So, and then this is really cool. Like, if you think about it, like all the things that we're featuring here, like all these different categories or types of articles, we really wanted to share, like, not only do we cover stuff about GUIs, web development from Flask and Django, to math specific stuff, linear programming, and we've talked about a few other kind of math centric things across the podcast, data science tools, hardware, and kind of playing around in the project space, to just the tooling that goes behind Python itself, things like packaging. As a resource at Real Python, we wanted to really share what's available and kind of give you an idea of a cross section. Did I miss anything? Are there other categories that I missed?
Oh, I'm sure there are, but I can't think of any.
Well, the basics, I think I didn't mention that. And, obviously we have the Python Basics book.
Yeah.
All these kinds of really great ways for people to kind of get started in Python, which is definitely a common thing that we kind of dive into.
Yeah. It's amazing to see where Real Python has gone over the past, really couple of years. I mean, this is the first year we've got a podcast. So it's the first time we can kind of do this look back publicly like this, I guess. And so, it just, like Joanna, I came on board in early 2018, was like around March, I think. It's just mind-boggling to see the growth and, what we've accomplished, and just how much we have out there available for people now. And we've got the written content, we've got the video courses, we've got quizzes, we've got the podcast, we have the office hours that we're doing now.
Yeah.
Every Wednesday we're doing that.
June, or when did that start? I'm trying to remember the date.
It was around June.
July. Yeah.
I can't remember the exact date either, but But we've got we've been doing that every week for that. I think we missed 1 week because my power was out for like 6 hours one morning. And
a little bit of flooding and other
restored.
crazy stuff going on around you. Yeah.
But yeah, we've been doing that every week, and that's just been a blast. I mean, getting to be involved more with the community and the people that are subscribing to Real Python there. And so it's just amazing, I think, just to see what we've accomplished in the past couple of years. And really the past year has been enormous growth as well for us. So yeah, there's a lot on there for folks to check out and to enjoy.
Yeah, and if you couldn't tell from all the names that we featured, it's a real global operation.
Yeah,
which we featured people on the show from all the different time zones of the world, which I've been learning.
I think we've covered all of the continents except Antarctica.
Yeah.
I was about to say, I think so, because I know we've got Australia covered.
Yeah.
With Anthony Shaw. But I don't know. Do you think there are any Python programmers on Antarctica?
Yeah, they're doing science. I was
going to say they probably are.
Internet connection is questionable. So
I feel disappointed now.
We need to reach out to some of these people.
2021 goal: get someone in Antarctica.
All right, reach out to us, please.
Right in.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I actually wanted to stress that if you have questions or topics you want us to cover, there's resources on the site to reach out to us. Our email is out there, podcast@realpython.com. We'd love to know what you're interested in. And again, those of you who've left reviews for the show, thank you for doing that. If you like the show and like what we're covering, please leave us a review. That really helps kind of grow the audience. And it's been really cool. And I've enjoyed sharing all this stuff with you this whole year. And David, you've been such a great help and resource in helping me, bring in all those PyCoders articles and things for us to talk about.
Yeah.
We're excited to share way more information, articles, and projects with you in the coming year.
Absolutely.
Well, Joanna, do you have any parting things you want to say?
Just letting you know that this was this year, but we've got a lot of good stuff to come, so stay tuned.
Yeah, cool. All right, David, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and thanks, Joanna. Thanks for coming on the show.
All right, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And don't be a stranger. We'll have to bring you back.
I would love to come back.
Okay. Thanks again to Joanna Jablonski and Dave Amos for coming on the show. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast in your favorite player. And if you like the show, leave us a 5-star rating and a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Paley, and look forward to talking to you soon.